I have some great news. I'm getting my earwax removed from both ears. Today is an exciting video. We're gonna go through how to help your ADHD without medication. The first one is The ADHD Advantage by Dale Archer. This was more about the misdiagnosis of children in the US and inappropriately prescribed medication in the US. I read Scattered Minds. That was more so why people have ADD or ADHD. One for the practical solutions and how to actually implement them into your life. Treating your ADHD yourself at home is called ADHD 2.0. It's massively overdiagnosed in children in America, especially due to the fact that one of the determining factors of ADHD is hyperactivity, and a lot of children are just hyperactive anyway because they have more energy than adults. And this is something that they will grow out of. Seen differently in girls than it is in boys, because girls generally don't have the hyperactivity, and the way they do is sometimes fidgeting or zoning out or daydreaming is one of the traits that girls would have that's differing to boys, because boys will be more like disruptive in class, sort of causing a ruckus, so it would be more obvious. There are 1.1 million young people inappropriately diagnosed in the US. Criteria used for diagnosing is poorly formulated and based on the assumption that the cases are black and white, when ADHD occurs on a spectrum, so should be diagnosed according to a continuous scale. Between 1994 and to 2010, the number of children inappropriately prescribed medication grew by 800,000. Now this is where it gets really fucked up. Financial pressure from drug manufacturers, so pro-drug medical research into ADHD, is often funded by manufacturers who market their drugs directly to children. One even subsidised comic books about the benefits of medication, putting added stress and financial pressure on parents that are probably already stressed out about their child that may be disruptive or falling behind in class, when all they need is just a little bit of extra help and love, and then a doctor is throwing medication at them. It's just going to create an even more stressful environment for everyone involved. And I do know there's even shortages of Adderall at the moment, and one of the negative effects of taking medication is the National Institute of Drug Abuse confirms that on average children aged between 7 and 10 grew 2 centimeters less and weighed 2 to 7 kilograms less than kids not taking ADHD medications. Children with ADHD learn differently, obviously, so that just needs to be accommodated for. And one thing I suppose that the school as an institution or structure just doesn't suit every single child, because a child with ADHD, if they are sensitive to their hyperactivity, or they seem to learn better when they're moving, or they can't seem to focus on a subject, that school reinforces shame and punishment for falling behind in class and for being disruptive. So then it creates an environment where this child has developed a low self-esteem, which then in turn creates a lack of motivation, even more disruptive behaviour. So it's a vicious cycle. And I know classes each subject ranges from 25 minutes to 40 minutes, where a child with ADHD's normal attention span lasts 15 minutes. Children with ADHD and adults with ADHD also concentrate and work better after exercise. If a child is misbehaving or disrupting class and they're sent to the bold corner to sit or stare to space or sent outside, I know that's back in my day, children would literally be sent outside in the rain without coats on or anything. The teacher would be like, now go outside, stand and think about what you've done. And it's not releasing that energy, and it's just instilling in them that they're worth less because their mind is racing and they don't know why they can't act like all the seemingly normal children around them. So then it makes them misbehave and act out more. Some teachers have implemented this in schools. If a child is misbehaving or being disruptive or can't seem to expel that excess energy, they're sent out to jump on a trampoline. Because they're increasing your heart rate, you're actually releasing dopamine in your brain, which ADHDers are lacking in their brain. They don't produce as much dopamine as like a normal person would. So exercising and expelling that energy and increasing your heart rate to release the dopamine in your brain will actually help you concentrate. You can implement this yourself at home, or if you are a teacher and you have a child that has ADHD, or if you're a parent that has a child with ADHD and you find they're misbehaving, they can't seem to concentrate, if you could let them go play or run around, jump on a trampoline, you'll find that they can concentrate a lot easier after doing that any form of physical exercise. It's such a weird thing to be pissed off about. I remember when I was in primary school and someone had told me that left-handed people always have a secret talent, and I was always fuming that I was right-handed, so I always tried to force myself to be left-handed, even though I know that left-handies have it worse because systemically we're built in right-handers worlds. It's a right-handers world and the lefties are just living in it. Like, scissors are all for right-handed people. The book The ADHD Advantage talks about like the advantages of having ADHD and to reframe your mind, deconstruct the narrative you have surrounding your ADHD and how you feel like it's an obstacle or something that's keeping you behind in life. For example, example, like the difficulty focusing on one task. This can be seen as and reframed as the ability to multitask. Responding to changes in environments in new and innovative ways come in handy in creative fields. There's a lot about how ADHDers thrive in creative fields and creative environments. So writing, it could be product development, an artist obviously, photography, directing. We're also able to thrive in chaos. Also, forgetfulness can be seen as resilience. I don't know, I think that one's a bit pushing it a bit, because once me and Jason were on the way into town to get a bus to Galway, I'd forgotten my phone somehow at home, and I had the tickets on my email and I didn't know my email password, and obviously I couldn't go to Galway with no phone. Well, I could have, but like, you know, my cards, the way I pay for things on my phone, it's just, it would be a bit impractical to go to Galway with my phone. I can get over things a lot faster. I do know that when I'm going on holidays or from going for a night away, it was especially hard when my parents split up and we were in different houses. I was always forgetting shit and always getting in trouble in school because I didn't have the right book, or I'd left my project in my mom's and I was at my dad's, or I didn't have my PE uniform and I was at, you know, I always just had to reassure myself that I wasn't going to die or I wasn't going to get expelled just because these small mistakes happened. It kind of forced me to be more organised and write my to-do list, write my list of what I need. I've been really, really vigilant in doing that now every time I go on holiday. And another thing is I always have like an emergency fund for if I forget shit. So say if I forget my makeup bag or if I forget my toiletries bag, I have an emergency fund to buy like a random thing that I need that I know I'll use up anyway in the future. It's just that it's annoying that I have to get it there, but now I'm like more used to it and it's not as much of a big deal for me now if I have to do that. We also act intuitively, don't worry about consequences. This for me has been probably the biggest obstacle in my life, that I just rush into things and I'm impulsive. I feel like I've gotten better at it now with maturity, but anyway. And then in the book Scattered Minds, they describe ADD as having poor attention skills, a deficient impulse control and hyperactivity. The main ways it's seen by other people is tuning out, and that's why it's difficult in school if you're not really interested in the subject that they're teaching, or if the teacher isn't passionate about what they're teaching and you're not feeling like you're getting stimulated enough, you will be tuning out and it's so hard to get out of that. So the mind is absent when its attention is required to complete tasks or process instructions. So say you ask someone a question and then they start answering you and you completely tune out or zone out. Well, I think everyone does this. It's like a real mad thing to do when you're tired. When you go into a room and you forget what you've come into it to do. I think it's really trivialized, and I do think a lot of people do say that they have ADHD even when they don't, because some of the characteristics people have, but it's obviously just accentuated in more so in others, especially with ADHD, because it impacts every single day of your life. But I understand that some days of your life you could have an ADHD day where you have all these things happening to you, but it could be influenced by, say, spending too much time on your phone. You're not getting as much dopamine in your brain because, say, you're not getting sunlight, or you're not exercising enough, or you're not eating the right foods. So these things could all be curable, whereas people with ADHD, it's not curable. It's just these tools just help us on a daily basis, but it will never ever go away completely because it's a wiring in our brain. With ADHD, if they don't see the intrinsic value of something, it's much harder to concentrate and focus on something just because an authoritative figure has told you to. A normal person can just focus and study because that's what they're told what to do, and they realize that if they study, a parent or a teacher is telling them to do it, so they should. A child with ADHD is like, you're telling me this, but I don't understand why it's important. The ADHD mind can muster focus and motivation to complete tasks if those tasks are intrinsically interesting. Children with ADHD would really benefit from child-led education. I know that that's not suited to every child. What we find important is subjective to every single person. ADHD people could also have hyper attentiveness. So this is shutting out the rest of the world to engage in a single absorbing activity, which is a side effect of poor attention regulation. It might not be a priority or something that you're supposed to do first, but because you're really interested and you want to do it, you're going to do it first and spend the most time on it, which sometimes doesn't help, because especially if you're in a job where you have to meet deadlines and you're doing the one that you want to do rather than the one that's due first. It can also affect us in a way where we're not eating or drinking water, or you know that thing where it's like, when I get this finished, I'll allow myself to go to the bathroom as a reward, and obviously that causes health issues and we should be drinking water and we should be eating. So that's why hyperattentiveness can be problematic. Impulsiveness, so this is like speaking before your turn, and because of our impulse control we tend to interrupt people, also blurting out thoughts that people could find rude or offensive before thinking about how it can affect other people. And also we could be impulsive buyers, take excessive risks, binge drink. And then the hyperactivity can be seen as fidgeting, drumming their fingers, chewing their nails, tapping their feet, or can't stop talking. Or the hyperactivity can be entirely absent, which is a lot of time why girls go undiagnosed. Falling behind in school, or feeling like you're always getting in trouble, or it's like the feeling where you feel like you have your shit together and you're trying so hard and you want to succeed so bad, but you'll forget one tiny thing. You'll forget to set your alarm in the morning, so then you show up late to work, even though you are putting so much effort in. You went to bed early that night, and you made your lunch for the next day, and you picked out your outfit, and you had a shower that night also that you'd be prepared and ready for work in the morning, but you forgot to set your alarm. Those sort of little things that all add up make us feel really shitty about ourselves, and that we don't have our shit together, and we just won't be able to be like functioning normal human beings like everyone else because we keep fucking up. Or there's inhibitors from us reaching our full potential because there's these tiny little finicky things that will always constantly just get in the way. What's making us feel so bad about ourselves can actually inhibit brain development, which would help the brain development that we so desperately need. What inhibits brain development causes more tuning out. Brain imaging studies show that the part of the brain which controls decision making, the prefrontal cortex, is underactive. The neurochemical that regulates focus, attention, and motivation, which is dopamine, the ADHD brain doesn't produce enough of. So the treatment then would be to stimulate dopamine production in the prefrontal cortex, which is a lot of time where people are prescribed psychostimulants like Ritalin and dextrogen to boost dopamine levels and encourage fast wave brain activity. This increases the patient's focus and calms them down. The human infant brain makes millions of new connections every second in their first years of life. By the age of 3, the baby is less than 20% of its adult size, but the brain is 80% of its adult size. I keep imagining like a child with a huge head and a tiny body. Now I'm going to talk about how people get ADHD. I always thought it was a genetic predisposition. It is genetic, but it also has to be triggered by your environment and by certain things that happen in your life in the early years for you to actually develop ADHD. It's not like a thing that you're born with and you're destined for. They describe it in the book as sort of a blueprint, but blueprints all have potential to change. It is genetically predetermined, but the potential is expressed through circumstance. Focus, attention, and impulse control are part of a complex neurological circuit located in the prefrontal cortex. No one is born with developed impulse control, so this circuit must develop after birth. I need you to take a tea break. I know this vegan chocolate from Aldi is the best vegan chocolate I've ever had. And I know in my last video I was talking about like how you should eat healthy foods to make yourself feel better, and it's like the best form of self-care to look after your body and nurture it with nutritious food, which it's motivated me a lot more to look at what I'm eating and like buy it in terms of my cycle. And I'm in my luteal phase now, and for some reason today all I'm craving is a crisp sandwich and chocolate. So I must be getting my period in the next like 3 days. Which is annoying because I know it's going to make me feel shit, but like I literally cannot get rid of the craving. So the impulse control is developed after birth. This development of the prefrontal cortex, which is so important, and what me and Emer were just talking about on our last podcast, and how it's only fully developed by the age of 24 or 25. But this development of the prefrontal cortex, what stimulates it is joyful interactions with caregivers. And when I was reading this part of the book, all I kept thinking about was how in fairy tale stories it's always love that cures evil. Because it's in a fairy tale, obviously you think that's not real. Love can't fucking cure anything. The development in our brain is literally stimulated by joyful interactions, love, and intimacy. The stimulation of the prefrontal cortex when you're a baby is stimulated with whoever's looking after you when you're a child. So that could be your minder holding a loving gaze with your mother. When this happens, the infant's brain is flooded with chemicals which promote the development of dopamine receptors in the prefrontal cortex. Literally just making eye contact with your baby. There's so much more going on behind the scenes than you don't even realize with your child. And I know they're like goo goo gaga hitting themselves in the head, but there are so many circuits rewiring and developing in their brain in that moment. On the other side of this, which also was making me feel a bit emotional because obviously I suffered with postpartum depression. I think I'm coming out of it now, but for the guts of the first 6 months of her life, I had postpartum depression and anxiety. When caregivers are emotionally absent, example depressed, infants have significantly higher cortisol levels, and prolonged exposure to high levels of cortisol depletes dopamine. Obviously, mental health issues are getting destigmatized, so that could lead to a higher rate of diagnosis because more people are seeking diagnosis. But another thing that could affect the higher diagnosis of ADHD in our generation, and why I feel like it's been trivialized a bit, because people can be like, not this many people can have ADHD surely. Say my generation, what was popular back when our parents were parenting is the cry it out method, which is basically to sleep train your baby and to leave them cry in the cot. And this happens over a period of a few nights where they're screaming, crying in the cot, that, or you wait a certain amount of minutes. The cried out method doesn't work because the baby is self-soothing. The cried out method works because the baby has given up and thinks that no one is responding to their crying, so why would they bother? But during that crying period, high levels of cortisol are being released. This is not to say that all crying in babies is bad, but this screaming, crying, and then that develops into the not crying is still a stressful situation for that baby to be in. They don't feel safe. They don't feel like that someone's going to come. No one was responding to their cues. So that is an example of prolonged cortisol in a baby. Reacting to that crying by cuddling and bouncing and trying to soothe her, that is her then releasing the cortisol from her body. Whereas if I left her to cry on her own in a room by herself, the cortisol wouldn't be being released from her body, like out of it. It would be creating more cortisol in her body. So your environmental input as a baby, otherwise known as your attunement. Your attunement is the emotional alignment between infant and caregiver. So this is basically just responding to their needs. If you can see that your child is upset and crying and you kind of mimic their facial expressions, you know, the way we raise our eyebrows. Between the ages of 0 to 1, the female brain has up to as much estrogen in it as an adult female, and this makes us extra sensitive to emotional cues and makes us crave things like eye contact, interaction. And even though a female baby is only making gurgling sounds, they genuinely think that they're communicating, so they want to be responded. So that's why a lot of women intuitively, when their baby is making these babbling noises at them, we repeat it and say it back to them. It's actually creating that dopamine hit in their head. So that thing that we do intuitively as mothers, like mimicking their behavior, we do the same thing kind of when they're sad and upset. So if your baby's crying, you raise your eyebrows and you go, oh my poor baby, and you recognize their pain. That's good attunement to have. This plays a key role in their development of ADD or ADHD. So if there is an absence of this or a lack of that, so that's why it's so hard for caregivers who are experiencing depression, because you find it hard to relate to other people's emotions, or you're really drained and you can't respond to their emotional cues as fast, or you're not being there as a comfort. Maybe they're crying and your face is completely blank, or you're just emotionally not there, emotionally unavailable. Children of ADD parents have an increased statistical risk of developing ADHD, but the disorder is more common in people whose parents suffer from depression, anxiety, addiction, and OCD. People with ADD are more likely to be physiologically sensitive than the rest of the population. So children with the disorder have more allergies, a history of frequent colds and infections, can suffer with asthma or eczema, and are hypersensitive to emotional stimuli, meaning they're easily irritated. Your phone's not working, so you throw it against a wall, like that sort of shit. There's been a 36% increase in reported prevalence of ADHD. There's less stigma, there's more people seeking diagnosis, and this attunement plays a critical role in its development. So systemically, we're more isolated than we've ever been before. We live far away from friends and family. There's not really a sense of community anymore, and this is because we have less free time. Say in the 1930s we had up to 40 hours of free time a week. It's probably fucking less than this, but in 1990 we had 17 hours of free time a week. Both parents are usually working. Because the wage is stagnating and the cost of living is increasing, parents are forced to work more hours. That's more time away that infants have from their caregivers. That's more time that parents can't have with their children. Parents are more likely to be stressed, which can lead to emotional unavailability, depression, addiction, which again affects your attunement with your child, which can create the development of ADHD or ADD in that child. And because we're more socially isolated than ever before, there's a lack of access to support networks. So say your parents, friends, people to talk to, which again adds more stress and pressure onto the parents. Stress parenting undermines children's sense of emotional security, which interferes with the development of the brain structures that regulate focus, attention, and impulse control. So the ADHD makes your brain energized, creative, and fearless in the face of problems. So there's two modes of thinking. So there's TPN and DMN. So TPN is task positive network. So this is when you're immersed in a task or in the zone, or it could be if you've ever experienced hyperfocus. And then there's DMN, which is default mode network. So this is like when you're riding the bus or you're walking around, like you're not really doing anything. When you're using your imagination, you're daydreaming, you're innovating or solving problems. They're designed to tag team each other. So people without ADHD can easily go in between the two with no problem. problem. Whereas people with ADHD tend to get stuck in one mode and find it really, really hard to get out. So they're either daydreaming and they find it really, really hard to focus on a task because they keep thinking about other things, or they're hyper focused on a task or hyper fixated on something and then they find it really hard to get out of that. Say you're losing out on sleep, food, water, you're trying to talk to someone, you end up being late to things. So if you're stuck in the daydreaming mode, you could be fixating on your failures, your disappointment and the shame that is involved with ADHD, and you basically just fucking up, and then it's telling you constantly that you're fucking up more and more. It's like the opposite of positive affirmations. It's like you constantly telling yourself you're a worthless piece of shit, then you keep acting like a worthless piece of shit. The cerebellum is smaller than in other brains, in an ADHD brain. So this controls motor function, the cognitive and emotional processes. It controls learning new skills, regulating emotions and making quick decisions, but also balance and coordination. So you'll probably find you're a bit clumsier, stubbing your toe, bad with like spatial awareness. You find that you have random bruises everywhere and you don't really know where they came from. Good news, the cerebellum is the most plastic part of the brain, which means you can strengthen it very easily by exercising it all the time, and you can then overcome some challenges within ADHD. So number one, like I said in the fairy tale book, to helping with your ADHD is connection. So think of the prince kissing Sleeping Beauty. It's like that, but with your caregivers, with your partners, with your friends, asking for support, people telling you that they love you, intimacy, hugging. So if you have a child that's suffering with ADHD and they're getting in trouble in school, maybe talk to their teacher and that they actually need positive reinforcement to help them, because shaming them isn't going to make them feel any better. So when they're at home, tell them that they are worth something, that you love them so much, you believe in them, that you're proud of them, and hug them throughout the day, constantly and every single day. This needs to be prolonged and repetitive for it to work. And then if you're an adult, you can ask your partner to help you with this as well. But again, positive affirmations. This is actually why positive affirmations work. You can write them on little sticky notes on your desk, on your laptop, as your lock screen on your phone, to keep telling yourself and to counteract those negative thoughts in your brain if you are stuck in that mode of telling yourself that you're a worthless piece of shit. The most important thing, and this sounds all woo-woo, this is an actual practical step in helping with your ADHD. So treating yourself with warmth and kindness and focusing on your strengths rather than your downfalls, which actually helps with your brain development and will in turn make you better. Being hard on yourself isn't actually going to work. You cannot hate yourself into someone that you love. You cannot shame yourself into submission. It literally is not going to work. Physiologically, it is not going to work. And the problem is, and why it's so hard to overcome this as a person with ADHD, is because ADHD people are prone to disconnection because you don't feel like you fit in, or you can't understand why you don't act like everyone else, which then can result in shame, and then in turn creates low self-esteem, anxiety and depression. Anxiety, depression can raise the levels of cortisol in your brain, and stress inhibits brain development, which in turn is making this whole situation worse. So they describe it in the book as the other vitamin C. So think of love, intimacy and cuddles. Like instead of prescribing yourself pills, you're literally prescribing yourself love that's going to help with your ADHD. The shame is the biggest barrier to learning, and connection is the antidote. It can even mitigate childhood pain. If you're worrying about something, to share it with someone you trust. So my designated person that I trust is Jason. It sparks the problem solving in your brain. It's sharing your worries and makes you feel less alone. So it starves off the loneliness. It can help with identifying the solutions, and it's all part of the connection. Because of this low self-esteem, shame and disappointment that they feel, maybe from like getting in trouble with school or being always told that they're worthless or not going to amount to anything because they're disruptive in class, a lot of ADHD people's talents can lie dormant or unnoticed and never discovered. We have to be able to nurture that superpower within ourselves, regardless of what like people and authoritative figures have told us in the past, especially in school. And a way to help this, if you feel like you don't know what you're good at, because apparently ADHD people, and this is where the left-handies thing makes me feel better, because even though I'm not left-handed, apparently people with ADHD have one or two extraordinary talents. Love. So a way to figure out what they are, if you don't know what it is, write a list of everything you're good at, what achievements you're most proud of, what you love to do, and what you'd like to get better at. Creativity is an innate part of having ADHD. So we can thrive in environments where it allows us to flourish. Create an environment where it supports this creativity to flourish. And even though an ADHD brain is naturally wired to reject any type of routine or structure, we actually can thrive off it if we keep up with it. So for example, and I know it's such a small one, but physically writing down a to-do list, not in your notes, not in an app, but physically writing them down with the pen and paper helps you remember what to do, and ticking them off also releases dopamine in your brain and motivates you to keep going with the to-do list. And I know I'm eating chocolate, but to try eat food free from additives, preservatives, colorings and sugar, and stick to whole grains, unprocessed meats, fish, nuts and fresh fruit and veg. Drinking water, so no fizzy drinks. Try to limit coffee and stick to water. Again, getting quality sleep. You should be switching off your screens at least an hour before you go to bed. I would love to do a nighttime routine because I can give all this advice, I can do my research and I can talk about it on here, but not necessarily I'm going to adhere to every single rule, even though I know this. It's like we can all tell ourselves to drink more water, but actually are we going to implement these things into our daily life? Some days we're going to be shit and some days we're going to be better than others. I sometimes don't adhere to a lot of the things that I learn about, but that's fine. I do the best that I can. But one thing that I have been really good at is getting a good quality night's sleep, because that's probably the number one thing most important and what I was neglected of when I first had my baby. Even though she is the best ever, but it was difficult in those first few months. So because I had to go to bed earlier, I had to force myself to go to bed earlier when Jason initially went back to work. I had to create a routine for myself, especially with ADHD and just like wanting to stay up longer. My body was crying out for sleep. I will be doing a nighttime routine that I'm going to get back into now that Jason's back in work, because I know exactly what I'm doing. That'll be either on my TikTok or on my reels. Don't use any screens at least an hour before bedtime. So try to read, draw, do a puzzle, knitting, crocheting. If you don't like reading, literally do anything else other than look at a screen for at least an hour before you go to bed. And to keep your room dark and cool if you can. And the final one, and it's kind of annoying, we had Baby and Me yoga that was near us when we lived in town, but now we don't live in town anymore, so I need to find a new baby yoga class, because that's kind of the only way that I can force myself to do something is if I pay for the class, because I know I'm not going to waste the money. I can't seem to motivate myself to do exercise when I'm at home alone. It's because I can always find something more important to do, and it's the first thing that I cut out of my life when I have a lot going on is exercise, even though I know it's so important to our development, to our wellness, for our health. And even in this, like, it's literally, it creates fucking neurons in your brain to go off, releases dopamine, we know how good it is, but for some reason I just can't seem to motivate myself to do it. But maybe I will now after making this video. And sometimes I find that if you're like, say for example, vlogging your day, if I'm like trying to influence people to do these things, it sort of keeps me accountable. That's why I like making these videos. It sort of keeps me accountable in making myself a better person, to try influence other people to do things that are going to make you feel good. Anyway, the third and final thing to help with your ADHD unmedicated is exercise. This releases dopamine, which helps concentration. Because this cerebellum is small, our balance is kind of thrown off. So anything that involves balancing with your exercise is really, really good for people with ADHD. So they do recommend martial arts because this incorporates coordination, discipline and focus. But if you aren't into martial arts, another thing that is good, yoga, which is so nice, because I was scared now it was going to be like, you know, go run a marathon or something, because that's something I'll literally never do. So 20 to 30 minutes every day gets those neurons firing, can literally renovate your brain. That's the wording they used. If you do this for at least 8 weeks, your stress levels will lower, your cerebellum will thicken. So you can actually change the composition of your brain by doing yoga. So the cerebellum, which controls then learning, memory and emotional regulation. So like, imagine you can actually thicken a part of your brain just by balancing. And if you're struggling to focus, try raise your heart rate quickly. So if you're like staring at a screen, staring at a book and you're trying to study, it literally says get up, go for a quick jog. No, I'm obviously not going to be doing that. You can go for a quick jog if you're into that, do some jumping jacks, or you can put on a playlist and start just dancing. If you're stuck in DMN, which is the like sort of daydreaming one, and you want to go to TPN and you need to focus on a task, it says you can go out, you need to do a task that's outside your head, walking the dog, chopping some vegetables, or do a puzzle. Hopefully that was helpful now. So just remember, number 1 is connection, number 2 is your environment, and number 3 is exercise. All pretty easy. Bye!